have a new time so that we can accommodate the davening, because it is later in the day. And as we start, we dedicate the learning that we do to a swift return of our chatufim, our captives. Also, that we hope that the zchut of our learning goes to the swift recovery of our cholim and our brave soldiers, the pitzuim, who has been wounded on the field of battle, and the safety for our chayalim as they enter what could be the most dangerous part of the war, as we have entered Rafiah today. Safety for Achenu B'nai Israel, especially those who are on college campuses around the world, who are in danger, and the protection against all of our enemies and protection against our friends, and mostly for a swift victory over Amalek. And as we have said in the past, our definition of Amalek has grown to include our neighbors to the north and to the far northeast. Biyachad ninatzeach. So let's learn well. So it's been a month since we've come together to learn, or at least a month since we've come together to learn Chovot HaLevavot. And just to remind everybody, we are learning the fourth gate of Chovot HaLevavot, which is believing, but really believing, that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of everything. He knows what he's doing, and he has our best interest at heart. This is the essence of what we are calling Habitachon. It's, in essence, turning the keys over to the Kadosh Baruch Hu and letting him drive. And one of the major results and outcomes of reaching this level of Habitachon, the Chovot HaLevavot reminds us, is peace of mind. And over the course of this discussion, as we've talked about this gate, we've used different metaphors for this idea, be it a bus driver who we can just sit back and relax because he's driving, or maybe a tour operator that if we show up when we're supposed to show up, where we're supposed to show up, everything will be okay because we're not in charge. And we have learned and spent most of our time talking about bitachon being a critical part of our personal day-to-day lives. But the truth is we're living in a period of time where our bitachon on a national level is being tested. And I know that this is not the first time our national bitachon has been tested, and it probably won't be the last time either. We just finished last week Chag HaPesach, and at the end of the holiday comes Shvi'i Shel Pesach, the last day of Pesach, which recounts crossing the Yam Suf. So in that time, we were literally in an untenable situation. Paro's chariots rushing towards us and our backs to the sea. We had nowhere to go and nowhere to hide. I can't imagine a more helpless or hopeless situation than that. In fact, we said to Moshe, Hamabli ein kvarim b'Mitzrayim lakachnu lamut b'midbar. There are no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the desert. In other words, the only option we saw for ourselves is death. Right? And Moshe said to us, no, you don't understand. This is the time for bitachon. I've been telling you about bitachon and the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and now is the time that you need it. And to really accept that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is in charge and that there's a bigger game afoot here. And what you see and what you understand is not necessarily what is real. And he said to us, Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem tafarishun. In other words, you are not in charge. God will fight for you. You just stand back and be quiet. He is in charge. So imagine the courage that it took at that moment of panic and terror to turn the keys and the control over to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why we said after this event, Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagedola asher asa Adonai b'Mitzrayim Vayeru ha'am et Adonai v'aminu b'Adonai Moshe Abdo. That was the time when we understood we could turn the keys over to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he was going to take care of us. So just a few weeks ago, on the Motzei Shabbos, we sat in our apartments waiting for missiles and drones and rockets to arrive from Iran and from Lebanon and from Yemen. And we heard that it was going to take 4 hours for the missiles and the rockets, etc., to travel the distance and to land. And the only thing we could do was wait. Now, 300 is a big number, and I don't mind telling you that night I had trouble falling asleep. But I thought about this shir, and I thought about what Rabbeinu Bachya wanted to tell us about Bitachon. And I resolved that I was going to let the Kadosh Baruch Hu do what the Kadosh Baruch Hu was going to do, and I was going to do what I was supposed to do, which was to go to sleep so I could get up for Minyan the next day. And when I woke up, right, the sea had parted again, right? 99.2% of the attack failed. And the situation looked hopeless and helpless. But Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishun. God caught the missiles in we have something called Iron Dome, and we have something that sits above the Iron Dome, which is Sukkot Shalom. It is God's protection of us here in Eretz Yisrael. And this is what Chovot HaLevavot is teaching us. How do we build and strengthen the Bitachon in our personal lives and in our national lives when things look bleak and we can't figure a way out, right? What do we do? What should we tell ourselves? How do we get to the point where we can, with confidence, right? And I say with confidence, when I was learning how to drive, right, I was 16, my mother Aleha Shalom, would take me out. And as I was driving and she was sitting next to me, she would be pounding with her foot on the imaginary brake. And I would tell her, I say, your brake doesn't work. So how can we turn the keys over and not worry about the brake, knowing that he knows what he's doing? We need to continue to repeat the Bitachon mantra that the Chovot HaLevavot has set out for us, which is everything emanates from Hashem and everything is part of his plan. Everything he does has our best interests at heart, and he knows what is best for us. Now, added to this, right, is kind of a caveat, which is despite the fact that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is ultimately in charge, we have our hishtadlut to do. We have things that we need to do on our own. So, just as a recap, we find ourselves in the middle of our journey on how to build up our levels of bitachon, and the Chovot HaLevavot has set out 7 areas in our lives that are essential for us to understand the role that we play and the role that he plays. And now, according to Ibn Bakuda, these are the most common areas, but they're not the only areas. And so far, we've learned the first 3, and we're going to try and complete the remaining 4 in Yirtzeh Hashem, although we're probably only going to get to 2 more, and we'll finish that in the rest of the Sha'ar next week. So here is the list that he gave us. 1 are matters that pertain to the physical health and well-being of our bodies. 2 is matters that pertain to how we earn a living and sustain ourselves. 3 is bitachon in situations that involve others or the lack thereof, the feelings of isolation, family, friends, colleagues, and the opposite. And next, that we're going to start today, comes an idea of we have to have bitachon that we will be rewarded for keeping mitzvot in this world, both the mitzvot of the heart and the mitzvot of the limbs, but only in this category, mitzvot that impact us. meaning the mitzvot that I do without any interaction with anybody else, like lighting Shabbos candles, putting on tefillin, to use two examples. Next is a reward, similarly in this world, for my keeping the mitzvot in this world that impacts both me and someone else, right? Like tzedakah, or even getting married or returning lost objects, things like that. Then having Habitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that there is a reward due to us in Olam Haba, commensurate with the mitzvahs that we do in this world. And second is having Habitachon in Hashem, that we will be rewarded beyond what we have earned in this world, due only to Chasdei Hashem. Okay, so let's start with where we left off, which is the items on the list having to do with mitzvot 4 and 5. So this list of 7 is really divided into 2 parts. The first one is easier for us to relate to than is the second part. The first part has to do with our day-to-day struggle to survive and to thrive in this world, right? We used as our paradigm Maslow's hierarchy of needs on how to describe these categories, which is our physical needs and our economic needs to survive and our social needs to belong in and to have personal interaction with people. The remaining 4 areas are a little bit more esoteric and hard for us to relate to. And they have to do with the spiritual system that the Kadosh Baruch Hu has set up for us, which is reward and punishment for mitzvot that we do. And we have to have bitachon that the Kadosh Baruch Hu will provide us in a spiritual sense, just like he provides for us in a physical sense. So these next areas, right, describe situations where we need to have bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that he will reward us for mitzvah performance, even though it may be counterintuitive that he would. For example, if we wanted to do a mitzvah and we were ready to do the mitzvah, but for circumstances beyond our control, we just couldn't or didn't. So do we get points, and do we get full points for those or not? So Ibn Pekuda tells us that every mitzvah has 3 component pieces to it, right? First is an acknowledgement by us that the mitzvah is a good thing to do and we should do it. The second decision or resolve is whether we are going to do that mitzvah or not. And third is the execution, which is actually doing the mitzvah, right? So to use an example, I'll get to example in a minute, right? So we have been working up until now on 2 categories of mitzvot. And I know mitzvot can be divided in many different ways. One are the emotional mitzvot that you can only perform by thinking or feeling. And the other ones are mitzvot that are performed by doing. And we call the first one mitzvahs of the heart. We call the second ones mitzvahs of the limbs. And these mitzvahs can also be divided into mitzvot that we do on our own and mitzvot that we do that require other people, right? So, for example, like tefillah, davening, or lighting Shabbos candles, or putting on tefillin, right? They can be doing mitzvahs, right? The mitzvahs of the limbs that can either require other people or we can do by ourselves. So the Chovot HaLevavot says that mitzvah performance, or really the expectation of reward for our performing the mitzvot, requires bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So the question is, why would that be? So although they may look similar, the mitzvahs that we individually perform and the mitzvahs that are dependent on others, in this respect, operate in different ways and require bitachon in different ways as well for different reasons. And it isn't obvious how they interact or work. So let's start with category 4, because it comes before 5. Then mitzvahs that are only dependent on the individual, on me. So let's take a random individual as an example. Me, right? Take the need to get up in the morning and daven shacharit, right? So this is also true of any mitzvah, whether it's lighting candles, etc. So the first component is resolving our decision that the mitzvah is a good thing and that I should do it. So in this case, making the decision that going to shul in the morning is a good thing, right? That's the first component. Second component is resolve that I'm actually going to do that, right? I'm actually going to get up in the morning when the alarm rings, and I'm going to get up and get dressed and get ready and get ready to go to shul. The third component is actually getting up, getting ready, and going to daven, right? Showing up and then davening. That's the third part of the mitzvah. Just as an aside, we have 15 brachot that we say in the morning. They're called Birkat HaShachar. And one of the ones that we say is we say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam matir asurim. We bless God for releasing those who are held in captivity. Now, although this idea of freeing captives have a lot of currency today and carry a very heavy emotional meaning, in less difficult times, it doesn't have much relevance to us. So why would it that the rabbis would have set this particular bracha as something to say every single day, right, as opposed to on occasion? And so there's an idea on how to understand this bracha, and that is that the biggest prison we have is our beds, right? And getting up in the morning and going out and doing what we need to do. It takes a lot of resolve because there's nothing more inviting than staying in bed. And when we say Matir Asurim, we say, thank you for giving me the wherewithal and the ability and the desire to get up and to start my day. Okay, end of the aside. So where does Habitachon fall in our situation? In which of these 3 areas do we need to have Habitachon? Well, Ibn Pekuda says that decisions 1 and 2 are out of the Kadosh Baruch Hu's purview, right? So to speak. He has left those decisions up to us on whether we think mitzvot are a good idea or whether we resolve to perform them or not. That, in this, is our hishtadlut. But what happens if in the execution of the mitzvah we fail and we are prevented from doing the particular mitzvah? This is more of a chutz la'aretz example because everything is walkable. But what if you get in the car on the way to shul and your car breaks down and you didn't get to shul and you didn't get to daven, right? Due to circumstances beyond our control. I was willing, but at the end of the day, I didn't perform the mitzvah. We brought a story a while back about Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's daughter who bought vinegar and not wine, vinegar and not oil to light Shabbos candles. So now he performed a miracle, assuming we're not all Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. If we didn't have oil to burn, do we still get credit for lighting Shabbos candles or not? So Ibn Pekuda says the following. He did not leave us in control of executing the action to its completion, be it an act of service of God or a transgression. Instead, it is dependent on external factors beyond our control. These factors are sometimes available and sometimes unavailable. I assume that the translation should have been available and unavailable, right? So what he's saying is that what happens in our lives the Kadosh Baruch Hu is in charge. Whether we actually get to perform the mitzvah, that's on him. He looks to see that we have done our hishtadlut, and we get full credit if things beyond our control interfere and we can't perform the mitzvah. Now, the key is circumstances beyond our control. We have to trust that the Kadosh Baruch Hu has his reasons to either allow me to do the mitzvah or prevent me from doing the mitzvah. And he says that there is reward. However, right, this assumes that our intentions are pure, right? We have to be honest with ourselves. Were we really prevented by circumstances beyond our control or not? And if they were controllable, then maybe we don't get credit. So I was thinking about, well, what happens if you leave late, right? Is that situations beyond our control or within our control? Because had we left earlier, then it might not have been an issue. I don't know. I will leave that for you to think about. He also says here that it's also true about punishment and averot. So if you had in your mind, not you, I'll take the example for me, right? You're going to eat in the Scotsman, and you go down to eat in the Scotsman, which is one of the few non-kosher restaurants, and you were resolved, but it was closed, right? You get full credit for that avera, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu in his chesed prevented you from doing it, but were it not for him, you would have done it, and yet we have to be careful that it is not saved by the bell. So it's easy to look at this category and shrug our shoulders and say, okay, so what? Why is this here? And he brings this example of mitzvot, because mitzvot and the bitachon we need in mitzvot work 180-degree different than what we talked about in the first three categories. Let me explain why. So in earning a living, the outcome, the what, is guaranteed, right? We talked about in Rosh Hashanah, the Kadosh Baruch Hu fixes what we are going to earn for that year. That is guaranteed. But what is not guaranteed and what requires bitachon is the how. How are we going to get that, right? We use the example, we need to dig a well to get the water, but we need the bitachon in Hashem that he will show us the right place to dig, right? Because we know we have to do something to get it, but we don't know where, right? So he focuses on the how. He focuses on the how. Here in the mitzvot, the how is revealed to us. We know how we are supposed to perform the mitzvot, but the outcome is uncertain, right? We don't know if we're going to get rewarded for it or not if we fail to execute the mitzvot. After our hishtadlut, we need to have bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu that are actually performing the mitzvot is not, if it's not part of his plan, then whatever the outcome is, was for our benefit. And the Chovot HaLevavot, if you look at source 2, says, furthermore, when it comes to material matters, sometimes the means that appear to be good turned out to be bad, right? Digging in the wrong place for the well. And what appears to be bad turns out to be good. However, when it comes to the service of the Kadosh Baruch Hu and the transgressions of his commandments, it is not so, for those things are either good or bad and will never cease to be, nor will they change to be the opposite of what they were until now. Meaning, we know the what actual matters. God has constructed us to corrected behavior, and that never changes. So the second half of this idea is about mitzvot that impact others, right? Where you need a partner to do the mitzvot. So if you look at source 3, he gives examples: charity, separation of the tithes. Now you can take Maasrot without people, but he's talking about in times when then you had to give Truma and Maaser to either the Levi or the Oni, right? Whatever the particular tithe was. Teaching Torah wisdom to other people, teaching other people proper conduct and warning them against bad behavior. Similarly, returning deposits and debts, keeping a secret, speaking about a fellow Jew, behaving kindly with a fellow, honoring parents, humbling the wicked so they return to the service of the Kodesh Baruch Hu, advising people about what is good for them, having compassion for the poor people, and being merciful towards people when they are in distress. This also includes tolerating embarrassment by people when attempting to inspire them to divine service by informing them of the great reward that is due to people who perform God's will, and by instilling in them the fear of punishment that is due to people who transgress God's will. We're going to spend some time talking about that last piece, but these are all mitzvot that I can't do myself. Menashe, you have a question? Okay. So you have to ask yourself the question, why are these mitzvahs any different? Right? If you want to give tzedakah and there doesn't happen to be an oni, then why is that any different than my car breaking down? Right? It's circumstances beyond my control. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu, for some reason, didn't want me to give tzedakah at that point. So he arranged it so the oni wasn't there. The poor person wasn't there. So why do I need a separate category for mitzvot that involve other people when we could have learned them out or taught them as just one basic category? So what's the difference? So first, the obvious difference is that the mitzvah depends not only on my execution, but my execution in doing something with somebody else. But Ibn Pekuda says that there is a factor in these mitzvot that we need to account for that makes them wholly distinct, and that is motivation. If you think about it, the first two components of deciding it would be a good idea to do the mitzvah and deciding to actually execute, when it comes to mitzvahs that impact me alone, my motivations are clear. I only wanted to do this because the Kodesh Baruch Hu has commanded me to do that particular mitzvah. Once other people are involved, then my decision to do the mitzvah or not is now complicated. I have a mitzvah, we all have the mitzvah, of returning a lost object. So I find the lost object to its owner, but in my calculus, if I should do the mitzvah or not, maybe whether it's a friend or not a friend might impact my motivation. Maybe if the person's wealthy or not would impact. Maybe there's a possibility of a reward, or maybe it's just a kavod of helping somebody or wanting something in return, right? I mean, you can hear that if I find the watch of a very wealthy person, my thought isn't going to be immediately, in Baba Metzia, it talks about all the celestial rewards I'm going to get by returning this watch to this multimillionaire. I'm going to say, oh, look at this. How grateful is he going to be? So we need to think about these mitzvot in terms of what are our motivations in the first two steps. Because if our motivations aren't right, then we're not performing the mitzvot. Right? So he says gives us the following advice. When making the initial decision to perform the mitzvah, to proactively set his mind that he is going to do this specifically for the mitzvah and for no personal gain. If not, it isn't the mitzvah and he will not benefit from it. So there are mitzvot that we do, that we start out with a statement, l'shem mitzvah, right? We did that when whoever's gone to a matzah baking factory, before they roll out the matzah, before they put the water in the matzah, they holler out l'shem mitzvah matzah. We are doing this mitzvah only to make matzahs for Pesach. You do the same thing when you tie tzitzit, l'shem mitzvah tzitzit, right? So there's certain mitzvahs that you have to check that you say, no, my motivation is to do this. The second thing that Ibn Pakuda says, he says he should do it, if possible, discreetly, and better yet, in private. Obviously, with the exception of people who need to know. And he says that if you do this in this way, it adds to your personal sha'ar. But what about the mitzvahs that, for one reason or another, cannot be fulfilled in private? How can we be assured that we are not going to be mired down in our ultimate in our ulterior motives? And it's here that we get the idea from the last category. Actual execution falls into the hands of the Borei Olam. If the individual wanted to do this discreetly, he wanted to do it l'shem mitzvah, right? And it turns out that it had to have been done publicly, and he received a reward for it, right? That falls into the category of the Kadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated the execution of the mitzvah that way, right? The corollary, though, is he doesn't give you license to be arrogant about it. And I had brought up that they had put together from the writings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe a perush on this particular gate of HaLevavot, and he says the following. This is from Torah Menachem. There are several steps in reconciling this publicity with the need for humility when doing good deeds. 1, a person must assure himself that he is not using humility as an excuse against doing the good deed to the best of his ability. Meaning, I'm too humble, I'm not going to do the mitzvah because I don't want the Chovot. He must ask himself, is he truly humble, or does he display arrogance in other areas in any case? Right, so the question is he only being humble now? Or is this generally how he conducts his life? If so, then why should it not be a reason for public good? Let the pride associated with this public recognition cause him to have more humility. In addition to what is publicly being said about him, he should do more without recognition. So what the Chovot HaLevavot says, if you look at source 6, he should not rejoice when people praise him for it, nor should he want people to honor him due to his good deed. For if he does, it will cause him to become arrogant about his good deeds, and his purity of heart and intention for the sake of heaven when performing the mitzvah will be ruined. The good deed itself will be ruined, and he will lose his reward. I intend to explain this in the appropriate gate, right? So this is the gate of humility, which we will get to in Yirtzeh Hashem. So one of the things we need to keep in mind, although he doesn't bring it here, is that we are shluchim of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So if we're returning something, right, it's because the Kadosh Baruch Hu chose us to be the shaliach. And if somebody returns it, if you recall, what we said is we should say thank the shaliach, and because he performed as a shaliach. But the person we should ultimately thank is the Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? We had gone over that in the first three. We've gone over in the first 3 of these 7 categories. So the last 2 categories in the list of where we need to have Habitachon in Hashem Yitbarach has to do with reward. Has to do with reward in the next world. And having Habitachon in Hashem, that there is a reward due to us in Olam Haba, commensurate with the mitzvot that we do in this world. So having Habitachon in Hashem, what we will be rewarded beyond, again, what will we reward beyond what we have earned in this world, And the Kadosh Baruch Hu does this for us only because he is a Bal Chesed. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. God built a world of Chesed. Now, the Chovot HaLevavot goes on a detour. And I considered skipping this detour, but I think it's important for us to spend some time on it because it raises a question that we've all thought about at one time or another. And at the end of the day, I think it really impacts on our ability to have Habitachon in the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And that's the whole idea of reward in Olam Haba. Nowhere in the Torah does it talk about reward in Olam Haba. Right? The second paragraph of the Shema does talk about reward, but it's reward in this world, and it's reward not in spiritual, but in very, very physical terms. V'haya im shamoa tishma'u el mitzvotat, asher anochi mitzaveh etchem hayom lahavat et Hashem Elokeichem ule'avdo b'chol levavchem v'chol nafshechem v'natati matar etzechem v'ito yoreh ha'makosh v'yasafta diganecha v'tiroshcha v'tzarecha v'natati yesed b'sedeh v'hemtecha v'chalta v'zavata. When you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving Hashem your God and serving him with all your heart and soul, meaning if you keep all of the mitzvot, I will grant the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the late rain. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you will eat your fill. Very, very physical. There are no spiritual components to what he just said. So the question that the Chovot HaLevavot asks is that if they are so important, why aren't they in the Torah? Why doesn't the Torah speak about reward in the next world? And if we can't answer that question, then we begin to think, well, is this all just made up? Right? Did the rabbis make this up? Because it's not in the Torah. Right? We have an expression in Hebrew, where is it written? Show me. Miyamar. Who said so? And he gives 7 reasons why the Torah talks about physical and not spiritual rewards to be had. So first and foremost, he says that we are physical beings. It's true, we have a neshama, but in reality, we struggle to understand the spiritual needs and desires and components of our neshama, right? What exactly is a neshama, right? The famous doctor who I have never found who said it exactly said, I've dissected thousands of bodies and never saw a soul. Right? I mean, we are physical beings. How can we possibly relate to rewards for the neshama? I mean, how would you describe that except in a way that would mean nothing? Right? And how we can only grasp things that we can sense through our 5 senses, right? So the Torah didn't tell us about spiritual rewards, according to this reason here, because there's no point. What's the point? We wouldn't understand it. Second, he points out, not everything we need to know is in the Torah, right? And I'm not just referring to the rewards in the world to come, but the details of the mitzvot are not spelled out in the Torah. We believe that on Sinai, that Moshe Kibel Torah, what is it that Moshe received? And we believe that he received the oral Torah, the explanations and understanding of the Torah and the traditions, right? And these traditions are passed down to us from teacher to student, from generation to generation. And I'll tell you, I mean, the most famous example is in Masechet Baba Kama. It says the following: Amai, why? And I'll talk about why. Why does it say ayin tachat ayin? That it says an eye for an eye. Amar Rahmana, the Kodesh Baruch Hu said, Ema ayin mamash, right? That we might have thought, by just reading what's written in the Torah, that this is a Hammurabi law. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? You get your hand cut off if you're a thief. And it says here, Ema ayin mamish lo saikadata. You shouldn't even consider this, the Tanya that we learned in a brisa, in a braita. We might have thought that if one blinded the eye, the court would blind his eye as punishment, or if the severed hand of another, the court severs his hand, or if he broke a leg, etc., etc. Therefore, it says one who strikes a person, and they make a comparison between damages to one who strikes an animal, just as one who strikes an animal is liable to pay monetary compensation, so too one who strikes a person is liable to pay monetary compensation. Right? The Torah left this to our teachers so that they could explain what was written in the Torah. Because the role of a teacher is not just to convey information, it's to convey understanding, so that the teacher can look and see if they're grasping, and they can answer questions, and they can expand, so that when students and people leave, they understand, right? And when you have things like ayin tachat ayin, which is shorthand, it leads not to understanding, but to confusion. And what Ibn Kuda says is the following: another reason is that the explanation of reward and punishment in the next world was received by people from the prophets, and then they can be derived from the wise in every generation. And it was left out of the books in the same manner that many of the explanations of the positive and negative commandments were left out, only because they relied upon the transmission from the oral tradition. And we lost a great deal when we needed to write down the Mishnah and the Gemara in order to preserve the learning, because the Romans were killing the rabbis. But people started to rely on books. And the system is not to rely on books. The system is to rely on teachers to show you. And if you want to describe and ask questions about Olam HaEmet, the next world, and the rewards that we would get, it is better if it is presented by people who understand and people who can explain it to you. So the next question that you can ask is, okay, if they're so important, why isn't it at least hinted? Right? I mean, we do have ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, and the rabbis expound on it. So why isn't it hinted to in that? So he comes up with a couple of ideas. One is that people already knew that the generation that came out of the desert, because the Torah, although it is l'dorot, forever, it's eternal, it also was given at a period of time to a specific period of people, to a specific group of people, and they knew this. They knew that there were spiritual rewards for mitzvot, and it was unnecessary to tell them, right? So we know that God rewards us midah k'neged midah, right? He rewards us and punishes us in kind. So the root of the mitzvot are spiritual. So we would assume that the rewards are spiritual as well. So the other idea is, like we said, that things need to be taught and not read. The third idea is based on what we said before. While the Torah is l'dorot, for every generation and eternal, that the generation who received this Torah was steeped in a very, very physical world. And they couldn't understand the spiritual world. What Ibn Bakuta says, if you look in source 9, it says another reason is that people were foolish and of little understanding when they left Egypt, something which is not hard to see in the Torah, right? That they weren't ready for this. So they left it out and they put it in the Torah Shebial Peh, because one of the things that a teacher needs to do, especially a teacher of the generation, is they know when their generation is ready to hear things and when they are not. And when the generation is not ready to hear things, the halacha is that you withhold it. And you wait till the next generation who is. And the Torah even tells us that it was not until the end of the 40 years in the desert that we developed a mature understanding. In Devarim it says, V'lo natan Hashem lachem lev lada'at ve'einayim l'ra'ot. God did not give you a knowing heart and seeing eyes, v'oznayim lishmoa, and ears to hear. In other words, you weren't ready to really begin to understand ad hayom hazeh, until the day that they were standing before going on to Sinai, into Eretz Israel, which means that it took 40 years for us to get to a point where we could begin to understand and accept the precepts of the Torah. The Gemara goes even so far to tell us that when it comes to reward in this world, right, there is no reward at all. The way they do a schar mitzvah b'hai al maleka, that there is no reward for mitzvot in this world. So now you're going to ask me the question that you were paying attention, and we just read in the Shema, the second paragraph, that was pretty clear that there were rewards in this world. So which is it? Are there rewards in this world, or are there not rewards in this world? You would seem to think that based on the Torah, which is a pretty good source, that there are rewards in this world. So when the Gemara says there aren't any rewards for mitzvah performance in this world, then what exactly are they talking about? So Ibn Pakud, I added those. There, the silence is out. So Ibn Pakuda says the following, and it's a little long, but I think it's worth it. The Creator conducted himself with them being the Dor HaMidbar, the generation in the desert, like a father who has mercy on his young son when he wants to discipline him. He does so slowly and gently. When a father wants to educate his young son in the wisdom with which he will attain exalted levels, and the youth is not capable of understanding them at the time, if he tries to induce him by saying, bear the hard discipline and the learning in order that you later reach greater levels, the son will not have patience to bear this, and would not listen to his father because he does not understand him. Meaning that if the Torah said there's no reward, you're not going to get any reward in this world, you have to wait until Olam Haba, nobody would perform any of the mitzvot. Right? So he goes on, but if the father promised him with what is pleasurable right away, whether food or drink, fine clothing, and a nice wagon or the like, and warned him that if he did not heed, he would suffer, what will cause him immediately pain, such as hunger, nakedness, spankings, and the like, and gave him clear proof and tangible evidence so as to impress these promises and warnings in his son's mind and the truth of his statements, it will be easy for the son to bear the strain of the discipline and to endure its tedious work. So what he's saying is that he's giving him M&Ms in the meantime, so he continues to learn things that he can appreciate in this world, not as the ultimate reward or the reason they're doing it, but as a way to help him to continue in his studies, in his mitzvahs performance, so that when he is old enough or mature enough or wise enough, he can understand that these are temporary rewards just to help him through the process. And he ends, he says, And when he becomes a young man and his intellect strengthens, he will understand the intent of the disciplines he was put through and turns towards them. He will think little of the sweetness of the pleasures which he had earlier been so eager to run towards. This kind of education was a kindness towards him. In other words, when they talk about rewards in this world, they're talking about incentives. There's another idea that's not brought in the Chovot HaLevavot in terms of Sha'ar mitzvah b'hai al maleka, that we don't get reward in this world. It's because, and this is the idea of the Miftav Eliyahu, Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, that we live in a finite world, and the reward that we get for mitzvah performance is infinite, and you can't put infinite in finite. So you have to be rewarded in a place where infinite can exist, which is only Olam Haba. So,
just thinking, there are also places of faith like us, and there are little places. I'm thinking specifically.
Okay, but that's very physical. It's long life. I mean, it's not just the Shema where there's reward, right? We get rewards, but they're all physical, right? It doesn't say long life in Olam Haba. It just says long life, which means you'll be able to enjoy our physical existence here. So there's another idea here, and that this is a metaphor. And we talked about, actually, in the beginning of the Shiram on Chovot HaLevavot, that there's lots of anthropomorphic language in the Torah. And we talked about why is that, and it's because that's what we can relate to. We're physical beings, and we can relate to what we can see and what we know. And, God is a king because we know what a king is, and God is a parent because we know what a parent is. And, when we see God's actions in a certain way, we interpret that in the way we know that it's anger. So all of these things are metaphors, and the Torah gave us physical rewards because that's what we can relate to. Those are the metaphors. Those are the things that we can say, oh, this is the type of reward. Ibn Bakuda put it this way. Similarly, the Creator encouraged his people with promises of rewards and threatened them with punishments that would come soon, because he knew that after they would be strongly established in the service, right? Once we started doing the mitzvot and we understood what the real game was, their foolishness regarding reward and punishment here on earth would shed, and their intent in their service would be to him, and they would direct their conduct for him in a way that we can explain, as we explain all the physical forms ascribed to the Creator in Scripture. Let's stop here because it looks like we're going to run out of time, because for me to start this is going to take some time. All right, thank you very much. Shkoyach, thank you for coming to the new time.